Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, my fellow panelists. At the outset, I'm really happy to be back here at IDSA, and I'm really thankful to IDSA for inviting me to speak at this year's Asian Security Conference. I was sharing with Namrata my own experiences having worked here for about 7 years, and I remember when the first Asian Security Conference was started, the amount of enthusiasm and excitement that was there among all the scholars. I know it's 17 years old today, but having said that, I don't think the enthusiasm and excitement has actually diminished at all. And what I wanted to actually say is, having said that, I want to actually acknowledge the amount of work that goes behind the scenes. I mean, those of us who are participating here in the 3-day event do not know the months of preparation that is there behind it. And on that note, I want to sincerely congratulate Namrata, the IDSA, and the team that has actually worked putting this event together. Over the last 2 days, I think we have been listening to several speakers who have spoken at length on various aspects and themes that have been related to the context of Asia itself, in a general sense, that is. To my mind, I think this current panel is pretty relevant in that context, because we're not just looking at Asia in a generic sense, but we're actually moving away from that general Asia to look at what is a bit more specific in terms of the sub-regions that constitute this idea of the Asian region as it is. And I think in the past 2.5 decades since the end of the Cold War, I think what is visible is that there's this huge geopolitical transformation of the Asian region, which is very critical. And I think that the emerging regional as well as the emerging global order that is there is actually fraught with a lot of dynamics of change. And there is still a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fluidity that is there within this newly emergent regional order that we're seeing. And as a result, because of this emergence, there is also the difficulty in trying to address what India's approach, because I think when you look at the sub-theme of the entire conference and you look at the context of what comprehending the Indian approach is all about, what is important is that there is a difficulty in trying to, indulge in this exercise as to how India's approach will shape itself up over the next, say, 2 decades or so. In my presentation this morning, what I actually seek to do is to locate the geopolitical significance of Asia in the context of India's foreign policy and the implications this has had on India's objectives at 3 distinct levels, whether it is economic, political, and security. My presentation is actually divided into 3 sections. In the very first section, I look at the geopolitical importance of Southeast Asia, which is today being recognized as the core of a newly emergent geopolitical and geostrategic concept, which is the Indo-Pacific. In the second section of the paper, what I seek to do is to look at India's approach to this region and where has it moved from an economics focus. This doesn't mean that security focus was lacking in the beginning, because as early as 1993 itself, India had entered into defense agreements with the region. But what I want to focus is how in the 3 decades, the 2.5 decades since the Look East policy started, how is it that we have moved beyond the economics to look at the strategic partnership aspect of this relationship. In the third section, what I seek to do is to look at one of the core issues which has emerged, and this is the context of maritime security and how this plays into the impact of the India-ASEAN dynamics. When you look at the geopolitical shift that has occurred over the last 2 decades in Southeast Asia, I think since the end of the Cold War, the Southeast Asian region was actually seen as a region of strategic quiescence. And the last interstate war had been the Vietnamese intervention in Cambodia in 1979. Following this, I think the East Timor conflict, which has actually had both intrastate as well as interstate dimensions, I think was seen more as correcting a kind of a historical wrong. Now, around the time when the 2001 attacks on the United States occurred, there were some concerns about Southeast Asia, because there was some view that it would emerge, say, as the second front in the global war on terror. However, I think the region was very quick to respond with declarations and mechanisms to address the counter-terror measures. And during this period, I think there was this certain sense of tranquility that the region had gotten away from the Cold War politics when the Cambodian conflict was at its worst, and that it had actually gone beyond that, and the focus had been more, over a decade, the focus had been more towards building regional institutional mechanisms. One of the things in the context of building regional institutional mechanisms, I think one of the things that was very important was the role, the centrality that ASEAN itself played in these mechanisms. Initially, ASEAN spoke about being in the driver's seat in all these regional mechanisms. At some point, I think ASEAN realized that being in the driver's seat did not necessarily mean that they were charting the course or the direction in which these mechanisms were to move. And so they began to sort of shifted that from looking at it as being in the driver's seat more to looking at it as being within the context of ASEAN centrality. And what you see at this point is that from this period onwards, I think there was a shift to maintain ASEAN centrality in the context of regional institutions. And there was a dual strategy here because almost from its inception in the 1960s when ASEAN emerged, I think there was a two-pronged approach to how ASEAN looked at its relevance. The first was to look at the protection of the state internally in terms of insurgencies, particularly because at the time of its emergence, it had been a region, it was coming into a region which was dominated by Cold War politics. The second aspect was to insulate the region from external interference, and this is a clear aspect that the ASEAN focused on right from the beginning. Now, what you see, one of the projections that was there, the outward projection of the ASEAN was that it was an economics and a social organization. But right from its inception, I think you can see a huge degree of promotion of concepts that were actually, that catered to the political and the security aspects. And the concepts such as the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, the Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapons Free Zone, as well as the Zone of Freedom, Peace and Neutrality, ZOPFAN, all these had larger political agendas behind the origins of ASEAN. The emergence of the ASEAN Regional Forum in 1993-94, the ASEAN Plus 3 initiative, as well as the East Asia Summit more recently, and the ADMM Plus, all these initiatives have extended the ASEAN to the wider regions of both the Asia Pacific as well as the East Asian region. Now, while this extension has occurred, it's very important to keep in mind that in spite of these extensions, all these were being anchored within the principles and were bound together by the principles in which ASEAN itself was formulated. And what is interesting here is that as recently as 2011, the former Secretary General of the ASEAN, Surin Pitsuwan, he made a very interesting statement in an article that he wrote in the Jakarta Post, and this was called the ASEAN Heart of Asia. And in this, he actually said that somewhere along the process, the ASEAN had emerged as the fulcrum of geopolitical stability in Asia. 1 year later, this very statement was challenged in the 2012 summit that occurred in Phnom Penh. Now, at the core of the entire dynamic was the ASEAN Way, the gradual process of bringing members on board through consultation and consensus, and several scholars spoke about ASEAN's potential to move towards the formation of a security community. It was argued that ASEAN had developed the habit of not having interstate wars. It was argued that there was interaction, there was socialization, and that you could build a regional identity that was pushed forward by this socialization process. And economically too, I think the region had shown significant growth. And what you actually see is that the vision of incorporating all 10 members of the ASEAN into the broader regional grouping had actually occurred as early as 1999 with Cambodia, which was the final entrant. And the focus to build this economic success and to extend it across the entire region was one of the main focus at this time, notwithstanding what happened in the 1997 crisis. I think one of the clear shifts that you begin to see from this position, which began to emerge around 2010, was the subtle hint that came in the ARF meeting in 2010 in Hanoi, where the South China Sea was raised for the very first time by Hillary Clinton. The focus of the developments in the South China Sea were highlighted, and what you see is that there was this whole emphasis on recognition of the sea lanes of communication as the global commons. And by 2012, this picture was much more clear, with the United States announcing its rebalancing, its pivot to Asia policy, and which is centered to a large extent around the changing regional equations that has been pushed forward by the rise of China. The responses of Southeast Asia to both the rise of China as well as to that of the US rebalancing have been rather mixed. In the case of China's rise, its charm offensive, its economic integration with the region, as well as its as well as its investments in many of the aid-related projects in the region, have been clearly welcomed by Southeast Asian countries. But when you look at the political side of the relationship, there is a certain distinction here, because on the political side, what has been clearly visible is that there is a discomfort on the context of the South China Sea, how China's nationalism has been much more assertive, where the region is looking at certain issues of fear, issues of threat that arise from this kind of a nationalism, and this has actually caused quite a bit of concerns among the ASEAN members. On the US rebalancing too, I think this apprehension is quite visible, because some countries welcomed the United States rebalancing, while other countries were actually hesitant that it would push forward this entire, the power play between China and the United States, and that the region would not, as it stands today, the region is not looking towards moving towards a security community, but more in terms, the region seems to be facing a security dilemma. In the second part of my paper, I actually look at India's engagement with the region as against the backdrop of the geopolitical changes that have occurred. We've heard over the couple of days that we've been here that the Look East policy is not reasoned, and this is the fourth phase of the Look East policy, given that we've taken from the Chola Empire onwards what the Look East policy is all about. But I think for the focus and the scope of the paper, I will focus on the current policy and the current focus since the 1990s. Here what I want to draw from Walter Martley's work on the logic of regional integration, where he actually says that economic calculations can promote the demand for regional integration from within the states, and that the state automatically responds by supplying a certain kind of a foreign and economic policy that leads to greater integration with the region concerned. And in this context, I think it's very important to recognize that the India-ASEAN relations has moved from this focus on the economic to a much larger focus that also takes into consideration the security as well as the strategic level ties. As stated by the Indian External Affairs Minister in 2003, Mr. Yashwant Sinha, the first phase of the ties between India and ASEAN were actually focused on the trade and investment aspects, where bilateral trade with ASEAN, you see this voluminous increase in the bilateral trade. In 1991, it stood at around US dollars 2.3 billion. Within 10 years, in 2001, it had already touched US dollars 7.8 billion. And today we're at a stage where in 2015, the expected target is to touch 100 billion US dollars. And this clear shift on the economic front is very important for us to factor in, because the FTAs have moved forward, especially on the aspects of trade in goods. And you're also seeing a sense that the trade in services, which is to be operationalized by 2015 July, is likely to pitch this interaction to a higher level. On the security level, I think there has always been implications right from the beginning, and I will not deny that this has been there right from the start. So what you actually see is India has actually focused on a two-pronged strategy, and this strategy has been both at the bilateral as well as at the multilateral levels. On the bilateral level, one of the first recognitions I think India did was to acknowledge that we have a land connectivity with ASEAN, which is through Myanmar. And earliest, from its inception in the Look East policy, Myanmar factored in as a crucial factor, especially given the fact that there was the linkage with China. There was also, some suspicions of linkages with Pakistan. And I think this is where the Myanmar factor became increasingly important for the Indian context. When you look at the specific defense and security level cooperation that has been there, what you actually see is from 1993, when the Defense Cooperation Agreement was signed with Malaysia. In the initial stages, it did not really take off, but more recently in 2008, I think the cooperation is seeking to address issues of joint production and co-production, joint ventures, as well as collaborations. By 2010, this has evolved into what is called the MIDCOM, which is a high-level military exchange focused on the Air Force and the Navy. Similarly, with Singapore, if you take the example of defense relationships, it began as early as 2003, and through both the SINDEX as well as SIMBEX, which are the joint naval exercises, you see that there has been an increasing role of the Indian Navy in becoming critical in this sector of interaction. Vietnam and Indonesia have been other players which have had a level of bilateral relations with India, particularly in the defense sector. India has already, yesterday we heard Dr. Win say that India has already contributed US dollars 100 million towards the construction of warships. There's also been training of pilots as far as the Sukhoi aircraft fighter jets are concerned. And there's a lot of more interest both from in context of Vietnam as well as with countries like Malaysia and Indonesia towards procurement of missiles such as the BrahMos. Now, in the context of the naval interaction, I think one of the most successful initiatives have been the SIMBEX, which is the India-Singapore Maritime Bilateral Exercise, as well as Milan, which has been very, very effective. Now, the other aspect which is equally important is the international maritime boundary line that has been where India has been playing a very significant part in the patrolling of the Malacca Straits. And I think these are the clear indicators as to where this defense cooperations have actually moved forward. At the multilateral level too, I think there has been a clear shift. As early as 1996, you see India's integration into the ARF process. Later, this was followed by India's inclusion within the East Asia Summit, which many observers are looking at as a very clear indication of the role that India would play in the context of its overarching interests in the Asia-Pacific region. The more recent I think the inclusion of India in the ADMM Plus, because I think the negotiations had started as early as 2007, and it was in 2010 when the first summit was actually held that you actually saw that India's role was very, very vital. And, it was considered by ASEAN that India had to be a very important player there. Now, having said this, I think what is important here is that to recognize that India's role has also expanded to a new area which has come in only from 2012 onwards. In 2012, when the ASEAN India Commemorative Summit took place, I think what you saw was one of the main thrust focus areas of this was the whole question of raising the level of the interaction to the level of strategic partnership across the ASEAN spectrum. And one of the most important outcomes of this has been the entire emphasis given to the maritime security as a core concern of the two regions. And there are clearly two components that have emerged in this context of maritime security. The first is that regionally, the ASEAN countries have recognized the role that India plays in the context of securing the Indian Ocean. I think Smriti in her paper actually referred to this in the context of South Asia, but I want to refer to this in the context of the Southeast Asian countries. I think what has been recognized is that India has a role in terms of holding a box seat in the theater of the Indian Ocean. And this geographical location that India has actually allowed it to have an advantage in maintaining the security of the Indian Ocean. It is also expected that India would provide a leadership role in the context of where the Indian Ocean Association itself moved forward. And though India has been trying to bring in certain elements of security into the overall dialogue process within the IORA, it has not actually been successful. In a smaller sense, I think what the attempt that has been made now is to sort of percolate from the larger dimensions of the IORA and bring into focus the trilateral agreement between India, Indonesia, and Australia to look towards moving towards, addressing issues of security concerns within the IORA. Just 2 minutes, sir, I'll take. One of the factors that has been very critical for India's concerns in this respect has been the recent shifts in Indonesia, which is very critical to watch. The Indonesian president's declaration of the porous maritime dunia, which is a global maritime fulcrum, is something that India needs to focus on because nearly 18 ports are likely to be developed by the Chinese in this context. I will not go into a comparison with Hambantota because Smriti has already covered that area. The other area where India's role is going to be extremely significant is the importance that the region of South China Sea will be playing. I think we've seen that India has already been recognized as an extra-regional player in the South China Sea, particularly in the context of joint explorations with the littoral states of the region, particularly Vietnam. I think there has already been some responses from China on this, and one of the clear shifts to my mind is the comment that was made by Admiral D.K. Joshi 2 years back when he said that India's concerns in securing its interests in the South China Sea will be vital and that the safety of freedom of navigation will be one of the vital areas on which India would focus. Over the years, we have recognized that the extended neighborhood is a clear region of how India perceives its space in the emerging regional situation. And I just wanted to conclude by saying that when you look at the logic of India's look east policy, I think it's very important to understand that the look east policy forms the core of India's engagements with the rest of the wider Asia Pacific. Now, what is important here is to look at India's role in the context of three different layers. I would look at it at a neighborhood layer, I would look at it at the regional layer, and then at the global layer. These three should actually eventually feed into one another. And what is important here is that for most of the 20 years of the Look East policy, the focus has been that the Look East policy is an extension of our neighborhood policy to look at the eastern neighbors and not as a regional impact. I think what we are seeing today is a strategic shift to looking at the region more as an extended regional role that India would play and not merely in terms of a neighborhood role. One of the worries that I do have in this context is the fact that I'm not very sure that the region looks at us as a full-fledged independent strategic player in the region. I think there is a sense in the region that India has a tilt towards the United States, and that this tilt and our role in the region is actually hinged on where the United States is pushing forward our own, our own interests and their interests also. And in this context, I think it becomes important for us to understand that the US does remain the primary security provider in the region, and the Chinese are recognized as the primary economic partner for the region. Now, finally, on India's approach, I think when we are looking at the region, it's also important to understand the regional mindset. And the regional mindset, to my mind, looks more in the north-south axis as far as security concerns are concerned, and not so much in the east-west axis that in which they should be looking at it. I think this has to do with the fact that historically, China's presence, the kind of historical realities of the relationship, all these are provoking them to look in this constant north-south axis. In conclusion, let me just add that one of the most important things for India is to now recalibrate its position, given what's happening within the ASEAN itself. For years, India has focused on ASEAN centrality as the binding principle that moves forward India's integration with the region. All of a sudden, the centrality is under threat. There is a fear that the centrality may not be there. There is a fear that there will be smaller countries will start to take sides, and where then does India balance its relations with the region? And this is one of the reasons why I think both at the bilateral as well as at the multilateral level, there has to be a greater emphasis on securing this relationship from the Indian approach. Thank you very much.